Hello Year 8. This slide is aimed at helping you with your end of term written assessment on Animal Farm. Now the good news is that means that you've nearly made it to summer holidays. The bad news is that you need to do quite a bit of writing for us before you can go off and enjoy your summer. Your assessment is going to be a written one and you'll be answering one of the two following questions. Either, how is Napoleon presented in this extract? Or, how does Orwell present the theme of corruption in this extract? Your class teacher will have made it clear which one it is that you need to do. Now, before we look at the extract, it's worth us going over the 7 commandments that were written on the farm barn door at the very start of the novel. And they are, number 1, whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Number 2, whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Number 3, no animal shall wear clothes. 4, no animal shall sleep in a bed. 5, no animal shall drink alcohol. 6, no animal shall kill another animal. And 7, all animals are equal. I want you to pause this video and just think now, you don't need to write anything down, but just think how many of these commandments have been broken by this point of the story. So this is your assessment extract. This is the extract that you will be using regardless of which question your teacher has asked you to complete. So you're either writing a question on the theme of corruption in this extract, or you're focusing on Napoleon's character in this extract. If you're not sure which question you should be answering, double check your lesson sheet or ask your class teacher. I'm going to read through the extract now, and as I do so, I'm going to underline the key language that I think would help to answer either one of those questions. And as I'm reading and as I'm underlining, I'd like you to make notes at the same time. So it might be that you need to pause the video in order to make note. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said very quietly that the windmill was nonsense and that he advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this, Snowball sprang to his feet and, shouting down the sheep, who had begun bleating again, broke into a passionate appeal in favour of the windmill. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar sidelong look at Snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard before, or heard him utter before. So as you can see, just from that first paragraph, I've underlined quite a lot of language, and I'm going to go over a little bit of the language later on in this PowerPoint. But before I can continue reading, I'd like you to look at why some of this language that I've underlined, so why very quietly, nonsense, promptly, barely 30 seconds, indifferent, etc., all the language that I've underlined, how that might help you answer a question on corruption or Napoleon. You should have had a think about that, and we're going to continue reading. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside, and 9 enormous dogs wearing brass-studded collars came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, he was out of the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the long pasture that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever, then the dogs were gaining on him again. One of them all but closed his jaws on Snowball's tail, but Snowball whisked it free just in time. Then he put on an extra spurt and, with a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the hedge and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where these creatures had come from. But the problem was soon solved. They were the puppies whom Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately. Though not yet full grown, they were huge dogs and as fierce looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tails to him the same way as the other dogs had been used to do to Mr. Jones. I'd like you now to pause the slide again and see what notes you can make about the language that I have underlined, or whether there are some words or phrases that I haven't underlined but you think that might be useful to answer the question. Now I'd like you to have a go at answering a few focus questions so that you have a good idea as to how to start the argument for your assessment. The first question is, what does Napoleon do? So look back through the extract and write down what Napoleon does. Then I want you to look at, what does Snowball do? So again, look back through the extract and see what Snowball does and make a few notes. How do the dogs behave? Making a few notes about them. How are the dogs described? Again, making a few notes. And how do the other animals react? So the other animals that are mentioned in this extract, so not the dogs or the pigs, how do they react to what's going on? Make sure you have a couple of notes for each of these questions. They might just be a simple word or a bullet point or even a piece of evidence, up to you, but just make sure you have something written down against each of these questions before moving on to the next slide. Let's just remind ourselves of the two questions that you might be answering. Number one is, how is Napoleon presented? Or number two, how is the theme of corruption presented? So I want you to have your question focus in mind whilst we answer these questions together. So the first question is, what does Napoleon do? Well, he delivers a short speech. He doesn't give any new ideas. He simply just tells the animals that they shouldn't listen to Snowball. And it seems that he doesn't really care about winning the debate. And we know this by the end of the extract, because to him it doesn't matter, because he knows he is going to set the dogs on Snowball and therefore remove him from the farm and remove all competition he has. He summons the dogs to chase Snowball away. And it is also discovered that he has taken the puppies and trained them up to be his guard dogs. And these dogs are meant to protect him and intimidate the other farm animals. Now the second question, what does Snowball do? Again, even though this is about either Napoleon or corruption, it's important to look at how the other characters behave. So always having your question focus in mind. So either Napoleon or corruption, it's always worth thinking about how the other characters are behaving. So in this extract, Napoleon delivers a long speech with lots of ideas about the windmill, very different to Napoleon. He's then chased by the dogs and is almost caught. And when he runs away, he's never seen again. So this is the last time that Snowball is around on the farm in the novella. The next questions were about the dogs. So firstly, how do they behave? They obey all of Napoleon's instructions, so they go after Snowball and then they return to Napoleon's side at the end, and they chase Snowball, and it seems as though they don't mind harming or hurting or injuring Snowball. Which leads on to the next question. How are they described? Very aggressive, vicious, violent, intimidating to both Snowball, but also to the other animals who are visibly frightened by these dogs. But they're also presented as loyal to Napoleon. And the final question, how do the other animals react? So the other animals that were listening to the debate and then watched Snowball be chased away. So they listened to Napoleon's speech about the windmill. They also listened to Snowball's speech. However, the sheep start to bleat to interrupt Snowball's speech. So that's an interesting point to think about why they might do that. So why might the sheep start to interrupt Snowball but not Napoleon? And the animals seem quite impressed with Snowball's argument, regardless of the interruption he had. They are scared of the dogs, and maybe you might argue that they're also scared of Napoleon as well and what he's capable of. They are shocked about how Snowball was treated, how Napoleon set the dogs on him. And at the very end, they seem to be quite confused about where these dogs came from. By now, you should understand the main events and points that you can get from that extract, and you should be ready now to start writing your own response to your question. But before you do that, I'm just going to go over how you might construct a paragraph, just to remind you how to write an analytical paragraph in response to a question like this. So now we're going to look at a completely different extract from the very start of the novel, which describes Mr. Jones. It's actually the first paragraph of the entire book. And the question that we're going to be answering is, how is Mr. Jones presented in this extract? So it's very similar to the question that you need to answer on the other extract about Napoleon. And just like I did with the exam extract, the assessment extract, I'm going to be underlining the key language in this extract, which might help me answer the question. So, chapter 1. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but he was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. With the ring of light from his lantern dancing from side to side, he lurched across the yard, kicked off his boots at the back door, and drew himself a last glass of beer from the barrel in the scullery, and made his way up to bed, where Mrs. Jones was already snoring. So as you can see, I've underlined some key language from this extract which might help me answer this question. But now I need to put it into a paragraph, and each paragraph needs a clear point, it needs evidence, and it needs you to explain how the evidence supports the point that you're trying to make. So I think that Mr. Jones comes across quite a careless character in this part of the novel. And the reason why I think that, specifically through the words lurched, which I'll circle here, and the word kicked. And this makes me think that Mr. Jones is a careless character, is because these are quite rough and clumsy actions, and it suggests that he doesn't really take good care of his property. So now I'm going to use this planning that I've done to write a paragraph, which I've colour coded for you. So this is how you would write this plan up as a paragraph. So here's my plan, and now I'm going to write it up as a paragraph. Firstly, Orwell presents Mr. Jones as a careless character. This is clear through the words lurched and kicked when describing Mr. Jones shutting up his farm for the night. This shows he is careless, as these are quite rough and clumsy actions which suggest he does not treat his property properly. So that's just one paragraph, and for your assessment you'd need to write 3 to 4 of those in order to meet the success criteria. So you'd need to make 3 or 4 different points about Napoleon and how he's presented, or about how the theme of corruption is presented in the extract that we went over. So that's it. Now you should be ready to go and write your assessment. Use the help sheets, use the planning table. Make sure that once you've written a paragraph, you move on to the next line to start your new paragraph. New point means new paragraph. Make sure you're using quotation marks around any evidence that you select from the text. And once you've finished writing your 3 to 4 paragraphs, go back over your work and double check capital letters, full stops and spellings. These things are really important to make your writing seem clear and for you to get your best mark. Off you go. Good luck.